Welcome, folks, to the latest CoStar Real Estate Manager webinar. Thank you for being here. We're going to give everybody just a few minutes to sign in, and then we will get started. Thank you so much. Folks who are just signing on, thank you so much for joining us for this CoStar Real Estate Manager webinar. We are excited to get started. We're going to give it just one more minute to make sure as many registrants as possible are able to join us. Thanks so much for your patience. Thank you, folks, for joining us. We're going to give it just one more minute to make sure everyone's able to log on. Alrighty, thank you everyone for being here for the latest CoStar Real Estate Manager webinar, 5 Ways ESG Could Impact Corporate Real Estate for the Better. I'm going to turn it over to Matt Waters, our Director of Lease Accounting, who will take it from here. Go ahead, Matt.
All right. Thanks, Laura. Welcome, everybody. And again, we're talking about 5 ways ESG could impact corporate real estate for the better. And I'm here to co-host today with Kent Carpenter. First, a little bit of information about the speakers today. My name is Matt Waters, and I'm a CPA. I've been here at CoStar Real Estate Manager for about 8 years. And so far, I've mostly been helping our customers go live with new lease accounting standards, ASC 842 and IFRS 16. I'm sure some of you are quite familiar with the lease accounting topic. And then now here recently, along with our customers, we've been spending a little more time on the ESG topic. And that's what we're going to talk about pretty much exclusively today. Now, prior to working at CoStar Real Estate Manager, I worked at the Home Depot, and I also worked at American Tower. Home Depot usually needs no introduction, but it's the world's largest home improvement retailer, and we had thousands of locations there. American Tower is actually the world's largest telecommunications REIT, and there we had hundreds of thousands of locations. And at both of those companies, I led lease accounting teams as well as energy accounting teams, which is perhaps a little more relevant to what we're talking about today. I'd say it's kind of interesting in those days. ESG was not even an acronym. I don't think that had been coined yet, but we did track energy usage, across those thousands and thousands of locations. Most of the focus at that time was cost savings, with the understanding that tracking things like kilowatt hours, per month, per location, helped us to contain cost, identify efficiencies, and and get our accounting, proper, with the proper accruals, at month end and that kind of thing. So, I thought I would just mention that up front. It's nothing new to need to track, energy usage and efficiency and things like that. Matter of fact, it's, for decades now, we've been using technology to track that type of information, for the reasons I mentioned, not the least of which is to save money. And ultimately, I think, you'll see some themes emerge today. One of those is that tracking this type of information can add money back to the bottom line, at your companies, simply by being, better organized. So that'll be I think, an interesting topic and a nice benefit. So much of the press that we hear about ESG can skew a little bit on the, oh, great, more regulation, that kind of, negative side of things. But on the positive side, one of the positive aspects is it can, be a scenario that generates cost savings. So with that, let me turn it over to Kent, who is with us today, co-presenting, and Kent, would love to hear your introduction.
Yeah, thank you. I'm definitely happy to be here having this conversation with you. I know we've had conversations in the past, but now we can do it on a more public forum and hopefully, yeah, cover some of the positive sides of ESG. My name is Ken Carpenter. I'm a product manager here at CoStar. I've been here almost 6 years now. My background similarly in telecom, but from a software consulting and implementation perspective, some product ownership and management on that side as well. But we were really focused on warehouse management and logistics, software, project management, tracking, things like that. But of course, efficiencies are always a part of that conversation as well. So right now I'm the ESG product manager for CoStar. So we're working on our offering as part of the larger lease administration suite. And yeah, really excited to have this conversation, hopefully answer some questions or at least raise some additional questions for our customer base, and for everyone interested, and encourage everyone to go out and do the research and learn a little bit more on your own as well. It can be a daunting task, especially when you get into the conversation around the different reporting structures and the different disclosure standards. But getting started early, I think you'll hear probably both of us say that fairly frequently. It can go a long way to just smoothing out that transition.
Cool. Thank you, Kent, and thanks for joining us today. I'll just go ahead and say, I know everybody's wondering, you don't have to have a red beard with a little bit of gray mixed in, to work at CoStar, but it's not going to hurt.
It helps, I think.
All right, so just diving on in, CoStar is just, we're presenting today just a brief overview, of ESG. We're not going to get into the weeds here. We're mainly going to talk about the 5 points that we mentioned up front. We're going to talk about how ESG relates to corporate real estate. We're going to talk a little bit about reporting and what we can do with CoStar Real Estate Manager in supporting your efforts for ESG reporting so far. It's an evolving topic, so it'll be probably an ongoing series of webinars where we're able to give you updates over time on the reporting front. And then we're going to talk a little bit at the end about topics beyond reporting. And so that's just a brief overview of where we're going today. So just diving right into the overview of ESG, just to set the stage. I guess it's no secret at this point, the SEC here in the United States has been talking quite a bit about bringing regulations, to public companies, and that's, I guess I'd say, in a state of of review, right? We won't get into the politics or the or the timing of that, but I think it's very similar to what we experienced, I guess over a decade ago, where FASB and IASB, along with the SEC, you could say we're in discussions about lease accounting, and in those days, it did drag on for a little while. But what we saw with lease accounting and very quickly, I think after so many exposure drafts, the consensus became it's not a matter of if, but when. And I think we're really the consensus now is much the same. ESG reporting is on the way, not just from the SEC. Some countries and jurisdictions have already issued regulations. And so I think most of the experts would agree that, even from the SEC standpoint and the US standpoint, it's not a matter of if, but when. And so for that reason, a lot of companies like CoStar Group, public companies are starting to go ahead and release some form of ESG reporting. It's I'd say largely voluntary at this point, but I think the best practice has emerged to go ahead and get ahead of the record keeping and reporting requirements, to the extent that corporations can. And it's not just public companies. Non-public companies are the same, but certainly we've seen a trend with annual reports and kind of along the same cadence as 10K filings. You'll see public companies already producing reports like you see on the screen here from CoStar Group, just talking about these topics and giving relevant data. Kent, anything that you'd like to add on this brief introduction?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll certainly there will be a few topics that we sort of circle back to throughout the slides, but I think the main thing will be similar to what we saw with the lease accounting conversion to ASC 842 is that a lot of that prep work that people weren't expecting. So yes, we hear that a lot of people are in a bit of a holding pattern, waiting for the SEC or waiting for larger standards to come out. But I think understanding just how much work goes into just gathering the inventory of data, I think was a surprise to some people when we got closer to that deadline and the decision had been made on how they want to store and report on that information. It was a little bit of a shock that they didn't have the grasp on the data that they thought they did. So I think that's really something that we've encouraged early on is to go out and at least start to understand what data you have access to, what you're missing, and that ends up becoming at least a good stepping stone into preparing for the SEC communications and preparing for this sort of increased attention around reporting sustainability and reporting ESG, even if it's in addition to your financial disclosures for right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And I know now we're going to dive into your the main points that you're going to talk about today, Kent, the 5 ways that ESG could impact corporate real estate for the better.
Yeah, so I think the first couple of slides, we just wanted to kind of touch high level on the 5 topics, and I'll talk a little bit on each one, and then as we've said, we're trying to weave these points into the overall webinar. But this is really a follow-on and an extension of the blog post written by our president of real estate manager, Mark McDonald, on the 5 ways. So, really starting with the environmental impact perspective, corporate real estate has a lot to do with ESG, especially when you look at the numbers cited by the United Nations Environment Program, where they talk about 37% of GHG emissions coming from buildings. So this is when companies look at their overall ESG portfolio or ESG solutions, real estate may be a small piece of the pie as it relates to overall ESG reporting, but when it comes to GHG emissions, it's a very big portion. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. As we've mentioned, the conversations we've had with a lot of particularly US-based companies, as you can imagine, is just, well, we're waiting to see what happens. We're waiting to see, you know, what we need to aggregate and plan for. But I think it's so critical to just go out and get all of that, as much ESG data as you can, on your portfolio, organized and in a reportable format now. Sure, we don't know what that taxonomy for the reporting structure is going to look like, but we can start down that path and start to aggregate that data. So when we go through the first three, really follow the ESG acronym, so that makes it easy. Environmental impact is one of the more commonly considered aspects of ESG, and it deals with that GHG emissions factor, and reducing efforts surrounding commercial real estate. Some companies have started focusing on energy efficient technologies when they're getting into new spaces. Renewable energy is a question that comes up now. The companies want to start to track how much of their property benefits and leverages renewable energy versus how much of the portfolio is still on traditional fuels. And all of that really can help reduce operating costs as well. So it's not just about reporting, it can affect the bottom line as well. It's always a good thing. Then we get into, I'm sorry.
GHG, that's greenhouse gas, right? Just to
Correct.
Just to continue to demystify the acronyms as we go.
Yes, we do love, especially coming from telecom, we do love a good acronym, but yes, GHG is greenhouse gas emissions. So the green building certifications, that conversation comes up a lot as well. There are some different certification programs. A lot of people have heard of LEED. LEED has been around for a long time. I think BREEAM is becoming more popular. There's also Neighbors. There's a great Knight Frank article, and I think we'll try and roll up these articles. I may mention several over the course of the presentation, and we'll distribute those out as well, because I think those are really good sources of information. That way, we're not just sitting up here making this stuff up as well. But understanding those certifications, how they're assessed, can really help a company build out their ESG policies, especially for real estate strategy and acquisition. It's important to understand the differences and what those certifications are measuring. Some are project based, some are space based, and I think those understanding the space that you currently occupy and any related certifications, getting those out in front in a reportable format, seeing those expiration dates. We'll talk a little bit more about that as well, but just having that information at your disposal, I think can drive a lot of really good decisions. From a social impact perspective, employee well-being is definitely a topic that comes up a lot. It ends up kind of making its way into the conversation when you talk about things like air quality monitors, using natural light whenever you can instead of artificial light. This again affects the bottom line, but it's also something that attracts good candidates to your organization. They want to work in spaces like this. And there's plenty of productivity numbers as well, when comparing the different spaces and how that space is used. So that enters into the conversation. And then the G in ESG is governance, and we realize, again, we're looking for that overall direction, but it's a great time to just roll up this information in a way that when it comes time to report, you have this organized, you have it in one place. This is not dissimilar to, again, the conversations that we had a lot with customers during the ASC 842 conversion for lease accounting, where we want to get started. We want to, we want to choose a solution where we're going to organize all of this data and then realize it's going to be 2-3 months before we can actually get all of this information across our properties. And I think that's where we saw accountants were hugely beneficial in this conversation, maybe more relevant because it was a lease accounting update as well. But certainly we're in a great position to help organize that information and provide some guidance on what type of data would be the most critical to report out on. So I know you talk a little bit more about this in an upcoming slide, so that's timely. I won't trample all over that, but it is definitely an important consideration there in terms of who to kind of start the conversations with internally. And then risk management covers a couple of different facets, but we'll talk about it several times, and we'll include some additional sources of information that may be helpful with questions around disclosure and the different reporting standards there as well. So so flipping over, last 2 points are around financial performance and resilience in changing markets, and that changing market is also multifaceted in its definition. But in terms of boosting ROI, it does often come back, especially with real estate portfolios. It comes back to those energy efficiencies and the productivity gains that you get with some of the smart tech that's going into buildings, and just overall improving the experience of working in corporate office space. Companies will also want to consider taking advantage of, there's a lot of green financing and sustainability linked loans that are available right now, which is a great opportunity to, again, get that data organized so that you can understand whether you can take advantage of things like that or not. Good programs like that. Reducing compliance and climate related risk is attractive to lenders, but again, it's difficult to go out and engage and have those conversations when you don't really know where you sit from an ESG and a sustainability perspective as an organization, or at least as a real estate portfolio. And that leads into the final topic of resilience as an organization, because that data organization and gathering process can be overwhelming. But if it's in one place, reviewed, analyzed, verified as being as accurate as possible, then that a company can start setting achievable goals and be well prepared for whatever comes down the pipe from a reporting framework. And honestly, better prepared to deal with a lot of these climate related risks as well that we just we hear about on the news and maybe don't think about the impact of businesses as much. But it is definitely a growing conversation as well in terms of what types of climate related risks are being tracked. And again, who better to usher us through than the accountants that helped us through the lease accounting conversion.
Yeah, that's a great summary, Kent. And I, again, like you, I'll encourage folks to review the blog that's on our website by the same title. 5 ways ESG could impact corporate real estate for the better. One thing jumped out to me about what you said, and before I mention that, let me just also encourage any of the participants to use the Q&A functionality. If you'd like to make a comment or ask a question, please feel free to pop that open, and we're going to monitor that Q&A panel throughout the webinar. But Ken, one thing that jumped out to me was the S in ESG, the social impact, and how you tie that in with employee well-being. That really is another hot topic, related to what's commonly called now return to office, and just the vast effort that is going into now the thinking through of what type of office space makes sense, for this new era that the mix of work from home and in office, and concepts around like third places, and are you going to have a cafeteria? Are you going to have multiple small places outside of the office for folks to eat lunch, encouraging collaboration, and certainly, part of that discussion and part of what's attracting the best talent to organizations is this sustainability and um, the concept of what you had on the next slide, which is, you're doing good by doing something good for the environment. You're also at the same time doing something better, for your employees and actually attracting, the best talent because people really are, thinking along these lines, I'd say more and more and attracted to buildings and office spaces that clearly have these priorities, already in place. So I just thought I'd highlight that. I thought that's a great call out in the list here.
I think it's definitely something that we have had conversations around and that we hear a little bit more too, especially when you get into spaces in larger cities where commuting is a factor, where going out for lunch requires getting in the car and driving someplace because that office space may not be in the most walkable areas. So all those things kind of factor into choosing that space and developing a strategy around how you build out that office environment. And we'll get into some of the walkability and transit scores that we pull in from the analytics data from CoStar. But I think it definitely has a seat at the table when you're talking about the employee well-being. Can I walk out the front door and go to a lot of different places, a lot of different options for lunch and shopping, and I think it moves the needle.
Yeah, no doubt. And speaking of having a seat at the table, I think a lot of our customers, at least at CoStar Real Estate Manager, have worked in the accounting and lease administration space. I have as well as I mentioned in my introduction. So much so that I've put some thought into this, and I really genuinely believe that ESG is a huge opportunity for lease accounting and lease administration professionals. I wrote a blog that you can also access on our website called ESG Reporting Will Boost the Accounting Profession. And in that blog, I argue that there are so many parallels between what we have just been through with lease accounting, with ASC 842 in the US and IFRS 16 internationally. There are so many parallels. Really, I guess the main one that I'll highlight here is that what did we do with lease accounting? We had a giant population of lease data spread out all over the world in many cases. We heard stories of people pulling lease documents out of their file cabinets and desk drawers all over, and so the accounting team and the lease administration team had to collect that, by sending surveys out into the field or however they went about collecting that. But either way, there's just a vast amount of data that had to be consolidated into one central location. There were a large number of stakeholders that were involved in the lease accounting transition, and that included real estate and property management, logistics, maintenance, IT with servers and printers, procurement because procurement had access to many contracts, especially for equipment leases, legal for the same reason, with almost all leases needing some type of touch by the legal team. Financial planning or FP&A was involved, accounting, of course, external reporting, investor relations, treasury, and tax. I'd argue that pretty much, I just kind of talked through this and framed it up around lease accounting, but we could have the exact same conversation about ESG and thinking, well, who are the main people we might reach out to if we want to start to get a handle what types of equipment and real estate are we using that moves the needle on our greenhouse gases or carbon emissions. It would be the same list of people to start with, at least, just thinking through procurement and reaching out to that business partner, that stakeholder, and starting this conversation early. It certainly proved out to be a best practice to start the conversations with the stakeholders on this list early in the lease accounting transition. And I think as we start to get our hands around the amount of data and record keeping requirements that'll be required for ESG, I think a similar process is going to be the way that we start. And one final thing on this, I'd say the companies in the lease accounting transition that started early really set themselves up for success. And we saw at CoStar Real Estate Manager, I know I mentioned we've helped over 1,000 companies go live with the lease accounting standards, over the past several years. And what we saw, and witnessed firsthand, was that the ones that started having conversations with stakeholders started, even before the standards were finalized in 2019 and became required for public companies. Some companies started even before that, gathering data, setting up working groups and project teams to consolidate that lease accounting data into a central repository. Even though they didn't know exactly what the balance sheet impact was going to be quite yet, they knew they had to get started. Again, it wasn't a matter of if, it was when. They knew they had to get started getting their hands around that vast amount of data. And so I would argue that the best practice now, and what we're trying to do to help our customers is do the same thing now, and that'd be for ESG to start with what you know, and start gathering data, start working with the list of stakeholders at your organization now.
Yeah, I think I think we have definitely reiterated that point, and I don't think it can be said enough. And I think especially when you think about the implications around reporting your greenhouse gas emissions on a scope 3 from a scope 3 perspective, those have tendrils into so many departments. So I think the list that you have is absolutely the place to start, but that list can grow. And I think what we heard a lot when companies were at first aggregating this data was they were learning all the time the questions that they needed to ask. And so, we eventually put together a template of the kind of minimum requirements for what information we needed to be able to properly set them up for this conversion. But it is a learning process. And I think what we've seen a lot too is so much of the overall ESG topic is really can be industry specific, it can be department specific. So there are nuances to it where it is not a, here are the 10 things that I need from every property. It can be varied, and you start to learn those questions and things to check on and investigate further as you start to build that picture of your total portfolio. And the earlier the better. Absolutely. So I'll jump in if we're ready and just kind of talk maybe from the flip side of how commercial real estate is impacting ESG, right? ESG is such a huge topic, and I think maybe gets confused around what it actually means. There's been articles around pretty prolific people saying I don't use ESG anymore. That terminology is dead to me because it's just been trampled on. But I think when we can maybe refine it a little bit when we just go at it from a commercial real estate perspective and try and simplify it a little bit. Mark makes a comment in the blog post that not everyone is passionate about ESG, which I can't imagine it does so well as a conversation starter at parties. But sure, that this is not something that everyone is excited to get involved in and learn more about. But starting small, so starting to ask those questions and investigate a little bit, I think becomes a little less overwhelming. It's just important to understand how CRE impacts your overall ESG position as an organization. Understand the strategies, the goals that have been set, even if it's at a smaller scale. And you mentioned, private companies are not immune. They may, they may follow a similar pattern where public companies are kind of the first to pave the way in terms of reporting standards and things like that. Private companies have a little bit more time, but when we look at some of the local regulations at the state, city, even county level, regulations and policies are impacting real estate portfolios right now, and can have a more immediate impact, which, again, may sound alarming, but it actually ends up being a little microcosm of compliance, where you can use these policies and regulations as a stepping stone towards that larger compliance goal for the business. And so understanding some of those local regulations, you start to get a better sense of what's coming down. And then, as we mentioned before, risk disclosure, something we hear companies ask about frequently, specifically around that climate related risk, because it can be disruptive, and we'll definitely show you and kind of how we have determined we want to track it, but companies are tracking this at various levels. Some are going on a, yes, there's a risk to whatever it may be, water stress ends up being a drought risk essentially, or flood risk. We are now seeing requests to track earthquake risks as well, and any of these major events that can be disruptive to business. Companies want to know where we occupy space, and are these legitimate risks that we need to be concerned with, or at least start to focus on at some point. And then the flip side of that is opportunities on where to move space away from those risks, and how to make better decisions so that you're setting yourself up as best as possible. So there's kind of always that the globe seems to be constantly shifting, and areas that didn't seem to have any real natural disaster risk now are coming up. I mean, nobody needs to remind California right now that the things can change abruptly, and it can be hugely disruptive. I think yesterday I was just hearing some comments about the weather, but it seems like the entire state of California is under some form of flood or mudslide risk. So that it's a huge discussion, and so understanding how that affects where the company occupies space is absolutely pertinent, aside from disclosure. And then, touching on just some of the building efficiencies and financial performance, I think all of that is really wrapped up into, lowering operating expenses. But as we mentioned before, the energy efficiencies in real estate portfolio can really help to reduce those operating costs, both as a property owner, and as a tenant occupying space. Maybe depending on the service type of the lease, but it's one of those things where it ends up everyone benefits from this reduced operating costs on utilities. Smart building technology is coming a long way. You start to see more companies are advertising this, building these smart spaces that are better at adjusting temperature, better at adjusting window shades and things like that to save as much as possible at every opportunity. So there's a lot to take advantage of there. And it's also about site selection, as we mentioned. A company may consider the proximity to public transportation and access to green spaces for the sake of productivity. Again, the employee well-being, if you're around and have the public transit opportunities to take advantage of. I know a lot of folks in our office take advantage of that in Atlanta. But looking at those walkability and transit scores, at least, and understanding what you're getting into, I think is a really good place to start when you're looking at new lease space. And that's again, those are scores that CoStar is tracking on with their analytics data, and those scores we pull down and match against the properties that are loaded into Real Estate Manager, so we have that information up and available for us as well. So I think taking advantage of that is huge. And well, you mentioned it earlier, the quote from McKinsey and Company that calls revenue growth profitable growth and ESG priorities is the triple play. And we have article after article on CEOs prioritizing ESG this year, and I think it's building momentum. It's garnering a lot of attention, and I think 2024 we'll definitely see we'll see a lot of changes, but I think we'll just see a growing attention to the right areas of these sustainability discussions. I think we'll maybe mention it later, but we're sort of moving away from just shifting around carbon credits and actually making an impact, and that I think is the key to the message here, that it's not not only can you do well while doing good, but you can do better. So it's you're benefiting from these changes, but you're also making a substantial impact and not just obfuscating your carbon emissions at that point. And then we switch to the brand image and investor transparency. I think these are maybe lesser discussed, particularly from the brand image perspective, but it is something that large public companies are benefiting from as well. And it starts at the local level as well. When you start to engage with the local community, it builds that local brand image for your organization, wherever you're occupying space there. Contributing to sustainability related projects and activities go a long way, towards building that reputation as well. So from a social capital perspective, I think you're building that brand image up, but then any progress that you're making towards overall sustainability and risk mitigation is of course attractive to investors. And we alluded to it before, but there's a growing interest to as investors to put their money in companies that have clear sustainability goals. They're moving towards a goal, whether it be the Paris Accord agreement and what a lot of companies are sticking out there. But any progress, I think at this point is attractive for companies paying attention to it, and they're putting some effort into it. I think that goes a long way. Mitigating climate related risk obviously has a huge impact on investor attraction as well, and voluntary disclosure means that you're already organizing that data, you're starting to get your arms around it. Key components of a strategy to attract those ESG conscious investors. And I'll talk about the ways that the companies are tracking those risks with us as well. We'll get into a little bit more of what we're doing to at least offer that information up in an easily reportable fashion. But I think kind of going back to McKinsey as well, we've seen the EU reporting a directive to prevent misleading language, environmentally friendly, climate neutral, eco, all these words that have been thrown out before that could be considered greenwashing. Excuse me, greenwashing. I get very upset about this topic. I think they're starting to crack down on that. So it's not so easy to just say you're climate neutral or you're carbon neutral. There are steps being taken to enforce the work behind that and making sure that it's not just a claim and then let's see where it goes. I wonder how it's affecting the carbon credit market and cap and trade markets like the EU ETS, where so much of that is predicated on let me sell off some of my carbon credit to another company who ultimately is still producing the same greenhouse gas emissions that they were a year ago, but now they're able to kind of buy up more allowance for that and not really making meaningful changes. I think that's that maybe has been going on for a little while that may change. So I think we'll see some actual meaningful progress there, once more regulation comes in around that. Yeah, it's not enough. We saw the Super Bowl. I'm glad Andy Reid was mic'd up so we could hear Travis yelling about the carbon credit offset for all those private jet flights that Taylor's taking, but it's not enough. We have to make meaningful change and actually take steps to reducing that overall. So appreciate the effort, but I think we'll want to see a little bit more.
Yeah, I was surprised they were talking about this during the big game, but I guess that just goes to show you that it's an important topic, right?
It goes back to what I said. I don't know who's not passionate about it. Travis is clearly passionate about it, so I think it's more prolific than we thought it might be.
All right, so now Kent, I know we're going to dive into the reporting side of things, and this just gets into a topic that you know very well, and something you've worked really hard on, you and your team. So can you tell us a little bit about how CoStar is now helping our customers, prepare, as best we can right now, with the information we have for the upcoming wave of ESG changes?
Yeah, it's a similar approach, honestly, to how we handled the lease accounting transition. We wanted to remain flexible. We didn't want to go out and build this big product, made a lot of assumptions around, what the ultimate reporting structure and things like that. I think where we were able to help early on was just that overall organization, consolidating all that data into one place where you can report out on it in any number of formats. Companies are going through it right now. We saw them going through it in back in 2016, 17, and 18. There was an article written recently, KPMG reviewing 550 board members, a survey that went out and asked 550 board members how they're tracking ESG data. 50% came back and said they're still tracking it in spreadsheets, and that is absolutely something that we saw in 2018, something that we're seeing now. It is a nice place to organize that initial data as it's coming in, and maybe start to get a feel for how much is coming through there, but it's difficult to report on. It's very difficult to scale that out. A lot of times, the data ends up being tracked in various ways across different business units. So if you're a large corporation, there could be 20 different people doing it 20 different ways. So those spreadsheets are not going to align, and it's going to be difficult to aggregate and consolidate that data. So I think that was our primary goal, was to get a place in Real Estate Manager where we could store that pertinent data, organize it, report out on it, and build from there. And so, of course, that ESG product for us is still part of the larger lease administration suite. So we have property data, we have lease data, and now we have a place to start tracking the sustainability data as well. Facility risk factors, again, we've mentioned that goes right at the top of the section on when you come into Real Estate Manager. That's first and foremost, along with some of the property attributes that we track that may be ESG related, but the climate related risk factors of flood, fire, drought, earthquake. These are assessments that are being made, again, from either a yes/no perspective. It is a risk, it is not a risk. Some companies are tracking it more detailed around, give me a sliding scale 1 to 10 of sort of where this property falls depending on historical data. So it depends on how mature the company is in terms of how detailed they want to be, but there is definitely focus and attention on understanding what could affect their leased and owned spaces. And we've seen a variety of ways, so we'll go down that. But other environmental attributes, you have transit and walkability, you have the air quality monitoring, EV chargers. You know, a lot of people are driving electric vehicles now, so they want a place to plug in that's right there at work. They can charge while they're in the office. Even if it's a long commute, you know, all the more reason why they want that full charge before they make the big trek home. But we just try and aggregate a lot of that information that may be already tracked on a property form. We want to pull that in and call that what it is. It can be beneficial to understand that from an ESG reporting perspective, and so we want all of that information in one place. So that was big for us. And then we ended up right underneath the property section is a place to track these building certifications. And I think on the surface, it may seem like, well, you know, you have this list of certifications, they exist with the property. Sometimes they can be at a more of a leased space level as well. But property management usually has that certification information. What we started to hear more of is, you know, this is a part of a larger conversation around your overall real estate strategy. Expirations on these different certification types can drive a lot of decisions. Maybe not from a lease renewal perspective, but certainly around a certification renewal perspective. If I have an expiration coming due that's near or, you know, a little bit before my lease expiration, then there can be a lot of money, a lot of work around these assessments. And you know, companies need to make that informed decision whether to renew those certifications or, you know, hold off until they understand if they're going to renew that lease or find a different space with a different, you know, set of certifications and maybe some of that building technology as well. So, and that kind of plays into some lease accounting decisions as well. You know, if we can remind everyone that accountants are well positioned to deal with things like this. You know, companies are having to decide whether, okay, we're going to take these assessment costs and everything that goes into having this property certified. Do we capitalize it, amortize it over the remaining balance of the lease, or do we just treat it as operating cost and pay it outright? You know, and I don't have a good sense of which way companies are going with that. I don't know if you've seen those conversations going on from your perspective, but it'll be interesting to see, you know, what businesses decide to do on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a topic, a growing topic, I would say, with things like we've heard the term green clauses pop in to the leasing industry. We've also seen a resurgence of the concept of embedded leases, where, you know, contracts related to energy efficiency, or energy as a green energy as a service, you know, kind of these new types of terms that are floating around. They come back to what we became very used to in the build up to lease accounting, which was the embedded leases. Even if a contract at the top of the agreement says something like energy as a service or something like that, if equipment is involved or if real estate is involved as a part of that contract, and you have you have access to it, and it's a dedicated space and so on, it's probably an embedded lease that needs to be tracked. So the parallels and the interactions between ESG and lease accounting are many. And again, you know, this just highlights the importance of getting started early, and also shows why at CoStar Real Estate Manager we're investing in helping our customers with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Equipment, especially because of how varied it is and how many individual units may be tracked on any given master lease agreement, or you know, it may have individual leases spread out across. That tends to be where we see a lot of volume and a lot of different data points to track for ESG for equipment, but also just the very different the the different types of data points that you're having to report out on for equipment. That was a huge exercise to go and build the inventory around that for certain companies that had a lot of, had a fleet of vehicles or had a lot of those equipment leases there as part of that portfolio.
Absolutely.
And so, that comes into that definitely enters into the equation when you're talking about utility consumption, because you're talking about fuel spend. Utility consumption from a real estate perspective is sort of the next section that we wanted to highlight. And this is really setting up for ultimately reporting out on those greenhouse gas emissions. A lot of it is built off of whatever your utility spend is. So we have a section where you can enter in the monthly utility bills. You're tracking cost. Mainly you're tracking the units consumed for any one of those fuel types. We offer some out of the box fuel types, but it's varied. There's still buildings running on diesel fuel, so you're not just talking about electric, water, natural gas. And that goes back to asking the right questions when you go out and develop the inventory for your real estate portfolio. What are the fuel types that you're using? You might be surprised what certain properties are still leveraging to keep the lights on and to keep everything moving. So recycle programs, waste management, all of these things factor into the overall ESG data. So it's a lot. And again, reporting scope 1, scope 2 is probably a bit more tangible when you get into scope 3. Scope 3 just really kind of blows the scope out, a lot, because a lot of that is contributing to what you ultimately have to report on. And it may be things you're not considering because you're not directly controlling those, but it's absolutely a part of what you are consuming as an organization. And you absolutely mentioned it earlier, and we have a place to track these green lease clauses as well. Really, it is tracked in the same location that our lease administration tool has tracked it before. We have a lease clause section with a clause bank, and then we have additional lease clauses where a lot of those more specific clauses go in a slightly separate section. We now have just a way to track which ones are considered green lease clauses. Some companies take the approach of, when we go in and negotiate a new contract, we want to fit these green clauses in. A lot of it has to do with access to data that may be kept at the property management level or ownership level that ultimately tenants will have to report out on as they occupy that space. So they want to make sure that they'll be able to get that information. Likewise, owners and property managers can benefit from these clauses as well, because they will need information from the tenants in terms of some of their uses and utility consumption. Again, the conversation changes a little bit around the different service types for leases, but it's very much a place where we're kind of seeing like tenants and landlords need each other. They need to share this information, and they need one place to go in and be able to consolidate all of this data for them both to take advantage of. So it's a good time to get on the same side of the table and work together on trying to get that information out there. It's just going to help everybody.
Cool. Well, this is excellent, Ken. Thank you to you and the product team for all the hard work on setting this up and getting it available for our customers at CoStar Real Estate Manager. I know we're at 1 minute till right now, so let me just very briefly say there's more to this topic. We couldn't possibly cover it in 1 hour. Some other things that we could have talked about extensively, I guess, are tax considerations in that, certainly countries and states, municipalities are levying fines already around this, or threatening to, or considering that, and extra taxes and tax breaks, that kind of thing. So certainly tax considerations are there. SKU level traceability is something to think about. The fact that every single piece of equipment, every building, every asset in the building potentially has a carbon footprint. So tracking that, getting a handle on it at some type of, something similar to a SKU level, is worthwhile. Of course, better data, better decisions. We saw that throughout lease accounting. We'll see that with ESG. The bigger picture is really, hey, it's probably going to save money. I mentioned that up front. It's also good for the environment, right? So I think anytime we can step back and think about the bigger picture, the better. I didn't see any questions pop in. I know Kent and I can stay for a minute. If there are any, feel free to still log those in. But with that, we'll just say thank you so much to the audience and thank you to you, Kent. And really appreciate your insights today and again for all the hard work that you and your team do to get the product ready for ESG.
It's definitely been a pleasure to be on with you. As I've said, we've had several conversations that I just enjoyed talking about some of the parallels between our experiences here, and we've really enjoyed working and learning more about this. So it's something that we are interested in digging into, following the trends and making sure that we kind of help our customers stay ahead of anything coming up. So absolutely encourage everyone to, if you have questions, you don't have the time to ask them now, follow up with us for sure, ask those questions and we can help wherever we can. Would love to talk to everybody more about sort of how we can offer a good starting point to getting organized and getting prepared.
Absolutely. And we did get one final question. Will you be sending out the slide deck with the recording link? And I think that's certainly possible. I'll ultimately leave that with Laura. But yes, we can share these slides with you.
Yeah, and I mentioned before too, we've touched on a couple of articles that we found very enlightening. There's a great Ernst & Young article on some of the tax benefits, tax advantages that companies can take advantage of, and I think it kind of speaks to the approach right now. There's a lot of benefits and credits and incentives to start disclosing ESG information and get that organized. At some point down the road, it may switch to being more punitive. So get ahead of it now, take advantage of these programs, and don't wait until fines start being the main motivator.
All right. I'll see no further questions. So again, thank you everybody. Thank you, Kent, and have a great day.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.